So Soupy Sales comes on, and he's talking to the kids. And he talks about how he and his girlfriend Peaches go to the baseball game. And something about he used to kiss her in between the strikes, and she used to... Welcome to Progressive Soup. Oh, okay. Hi. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With me I have Mike DeRosa, who's a member of the Green Party. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the campaign finance laws, and we're going to go from there and find some other things to talk about. But first of all, update us, Mike, on what's going on with campaign financing.
Well, campaign finance is before the appellate court in New York City, and I did go to the hearing, and I think that from the remarks that were made by the judges, I think that we're in a very strong position. One of the judges wanted to know from our attorney whether he considered this law to be the no incumbent left behind law of Connecticut. So I think maybe we have one vote, but I'm not sure. I guess basically the bottom line is that, you know, what we're looking to do is to have the law reformed, and a bill did pass or has passed from the committee, the Government Elections Committee,
yes,
which does not have built into it a requirement for petitioning.
Now, tell our audience about what you mean by petitioning. What minor party candidates in the old law, what they had to go through in order to actually get on the ballot.
Well, under the law that was passed, essentially the concept is that all political parties are equal in Connecticut, but some political parties are more equal than others. And basically the idea is that if you're a minor party or you're an independent, what you have to do is petition, and it's quite, you know, challenging, to say the least.
I remember that very clearly. If I could just, you know, go from there with that you needed something like 225,000 petition signatures.
Hit it right on the head, exactly, for governor.
For governor.
Right. That's right.
And of course, we all know, because we've been out gathering petitions in a lot of situations, that in order to get 225,000 valid signatures, you really have to get a lot more than that, because when the towns, when the registrars of voters, who, as we know, are Democrats and Republicans, go to inspect those petitions, they generally find at least some that they can throw out.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's ironic because in some towns it may be the town clerk, it might be the registrar, who knows, perhaps it might even be the janitor, for all we know. And I think, you know, the problem again is, you know, why are you allowing one set of parties to have these requirements and the other? Now, of course, people will say, well, you don't want just anybody on the ballot. But there's built into both the Arizona and the Connecticut law and the Maine law ways of, you know, allowing for parties to have some sort of modicum of support proof, and that would have to do with raising money. Of course, the amount of money that third parties and independent candidates have to raise is astronomical compared to Arizona and Maine. And the proof of the pudding here, Dave, is that in Maine you haven't seen a lot of nuisance candidates. We haven't filled up the ballot with so many candidates that, you know, it's confusing to the voter. These are all the spurious arguments that are used. Those
are the arguments they did talk about as being reasons not to allow, in fact, allow minority party candidates onto the ballot.
Exactly, the ballot access laws, right. And a variety of other non sequiturs. So the bottom line is we're really hoping that the legislature will follow through on this law. I mean, there's a couple of things they haven't addressed. I mean, the judge said in the case that they can't use the governorship any longer as a litmus test to determine who is a major or minor party, which is going to be a real problem for the Republicans because their registration right now is at 20.3%. So if they go down, you know, 0.4%, theoretically, and they don't get the governor their gubernatorial candidate to get 20%, they might become a minor party, which might be an incentive for them to pay attention to these laws.
So you'd only, in fact, have to get all the Republicans to, in self-defense to make sure that the law is written correctly, and then just to get enough Democratic senators and representatives in the state to follow suit, knowing that one day the pendulum can swing the other way.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are tiers built into this that are supposed to be incentives for us.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I kind of feel like a third-class citizen when someone says, well, you know, your opponent gets 90, but you only get $27,947.33. So it's a real
you might want to mention you ran for state senator last year, and tell the audience about that.
Yeah, I mean, this brings up the issue of how the system is devised. If I merely decide to think about it,
mm-hmm.
You know, it causes things to happen if I announce my candidacy. For example, if my opponent that happened to be in that case, John Finfara,
mm-hmm.
Who's the co-chair of the Energy Committee, if he is breathing and his arms and legs are working, what essentially happens is that he gets about $28,000. If I merely enter the race, he gets $50,000-$60,000.
Yeah.
If perchance I should qualify for the first tier, he gets $90,000.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit more money because it's a so-called uncompetitive area. Most towns get 70 or 80. It depends on mysterious things that no one completely understands. But
and a lot of the areas a lot of towns in Connecticut are very uncompetitive. One party essentially cedes seats to the other party, and the quid pro quo, the other party cedes seats to them in another town or different offices within the same town. So they pretty much stack the deck to begin with.
That's why the judge declared the use of the governorship as a quote-unquote illegal and unconstitutional proxy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the last election, we had a Republican who got 17% of the vote. I got 5%. And the judge said, well, you know, quite frankly, Mike and Barbara, you're losers. But, you know, Barbara was a loser at 17. She didn't get the 20. I didn't get the 20. How come she doesn't have to petition and I do?
Mm-hmm.
So he thought that was unconstitutional as well. The judge is Judge Underhill. He's actually here in Bridgeport, his court. There is another aspect of this that's just little known. Let's say that the Green Party decides that we're not going to run any more candidates, that, you know, it's too difficult, and we decide in this election that we're going to support John Finfara's opponent, and we come out publicly and say, you know, John Finfara is not our candidate. We don't like what he does about energy policy. We have the highest electric rates in Connecticut, and we think he's responsible for it to a great extent.
Mm-hmm.
If we merely make those negative statements under this law, what would happen is John would get an additional grant.
Because you're a de facto candidate then.
Well, not a de facto candidate. We're an organization,
mm-hmm.
Political organization that's out here making negative comments about
mm-hmm.
a candidate. So, you know, this is what we call the classic double bind. No matter what you do, you can't win for trying.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the problems with the construction of this law, is that it primarily is there as an incumbency protection procedure or mechanism. I should be able, or persons like myself, whether it be minor party or independent, should be able to jump in the political pool without providing the officials, the electoral officials, with proof that I can swim the English Channel twice in one day. This stuff, you know, if Ernie Kovacs did this as a little skit, you know,
okay.
I'm dating myself here. You know, people would laugh, but this is the kind of construct that we have here.
A little tiny bit before my time, but not very much, though.
Right, exactly.
I remember.
Or Soupy Sales, you know.
Yeah,
Soupy Sales did it, you know. I think people would say that could never happen in real life.
And by the way, the last word in the joke was balls. So you were saying, go ahead.
Well, like I said, the key to this is to keep your eye on the prize. And
mm-hmm.
the prize is that we all know that at one time in Connecticut we had the fundamental orders. But now we have the fundamental election law disorders. All right? And essentially what we have here is that, I think the Puritan Fathers who started this particular state had were suffering from a lot of errors. They made a lot of mistakes, especially in the sexual area. But fundamentally, from my point of view, I've talked to a couple Connecticut historians, and they say the important thing about the fundamental orders isn't that it was the first written constitution. It was that there was originally no mention of a king, which was highly unusual with most of the charters. So I think our Puritan Fathers got that right. They didn't want kings. They didn't want a king. And, that all fits in with the Cromwell thing that was going on over in Europe. So we're kind of like the sideshow. But the bottom line is that we all know that Cash is king. And that's the problem here, is that we have to look at what is really going on. If we're going to have a vibrant democracy, if we're going to have an open debate, if we're going to have a conversation about things that matter, we have to have a vibrant First Amendment that is being used. And I applaud your show, Dave, because this is an example of, it's not advocacy. What this is journalism of connection. You're connecting to issues. You're connecting. Because most of what goes on in the mass media is somewhere between a barren wasteland and a theater of the absurd.
Now, you mentioned the Supreme Court decision. Well, you mentioned it indirectly, where the U.S. Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice John Roberts, has found that corporations essentially have the same rights as individuals, and I guess you can deduce from that one day we'll have Walmart will be running for president against Pepsi-Cola. But
you mean that isn't happening now?
Well, it'll be a little bit more blatant, perhaps, as we go along.
Sure.
But
well, they're according to there's this whole business of our case is predicated on the fact that the state of Connecticut violated our First and our 14th Amendment equal protection rights under the Bill of Rights. And what the corporations did in the 1880s, from my understanding, and I'm not a historian expert, especially the railroads, decided that they were going to use the 14th Amendment, which was essentially put in there to protect ex-slaves from discrimination.
Correct, yeah.
And they basically said, well, we're people too. And so, unfortunately, that's not true because they really, don't die. They continue on if they don't go bankrupt.
Right.
Where we do, and that's one of the major differences. The other big difference is that they are able to reproduce themselves, so they can become a mother, a father, a son, a brother. You and I can't do that.
And we can't reorganize when we die either. Right.
Exactly. So the classic question is, what is a share? Well, what is a corporation? Well, it depends on how you define it. I mean, corporations. I'm looking forward to a day when we have a Secretary of State in the state of Connecticut who will say that she's the Secretary or he's the Secretary of State, not the Secretary of the States. And I'm looking forward to the day when we can make these corporations, through their charters, socially responsible, at least to give a report once a year as to what they've done besides lay off half their workforce. So, I think the key is I pursued, through the Green Party, these lawsuits, and I think that, unfortunately, why do we have to have these lawsuits? I mean, you think about Connecticut. You had the Shett versus O'Neill. You had this case. There's the education case, which just was litigated a couple days ago, that was brought back. It's going back. So what is going on here? And I think what's going on is that the legislature will not deal with these issues. They tend to be understaffed. Most of the legislators have 1/4 of a aide, and there's no competition against the corporations, against the moneyed interests, as Jefferson called them. And this is why we're in the mess that we're in. We have this economic debacle going on, and of course, if you look in the papers, the recession is over. Well, if you talk to anybody the recession may be over, but it's a jobless recession. And as a matter of fact, joblessness is going on. And I just wanted to mention this in passing, is that Tier 5, which was an attempt to continue people on unemployment did not make it into Congress.
Extended benefits. Is that the one that the Jim Bunning filibustered in the Senate?
Well, there was tier 1 through 4. I think tier 1 is like 7 weeks. Tier 2 is like 12 weeks. Tier 4 is like 20 weeks or 12 weeks, and then tier 4 is between 12 and 20. What happened there, and I don't think it's actually passed yet, even though they talk about 99 weeks. People, if you can't get a job in 99 weeks, but the issue is that not all states get 99 weeks. It depends on, these are the federal extensions. Now we're throwing 1 million people into this off the unemployment rolls. And
that'll bring the percentages down, won't it?
Right, and I think the other problem, of course, is that the mass media has dropped the ball on this. They're not reporting this, telling people, oh, you have unemployment insurance until the end of December, which is not the case. Now we're talking 5 million people that are going to be off of these extended unemployment levels. And these extended unemployment compensation, which, by the way, they paid for through their employer. It's not like it's welfare or some kind of program.
You put money into the system in order to have it there for you.
Right.
If you should need it.
Exactly.
Due to a job loss.
If they don't pass these tier 1 through 4, then we're talking 5 million people by probably June that will no longer have anything. Will not have any income. And then, of course, Tier 5 was the idea that we should extend beyond 99 weeks or in some cases 67 weeks, depending on the state. So the bottom line is, this isn't even Keynesianism. This is some sort of Neanderthal approach to the worst economic situation that we've had in the 30s, and a question I need to ask is, would FDR have done it differently?
Well, now that you mentioned it, you brought Jim Bunning back into the picture talking about Neanderthal. But how does baseball keep finding its way into our conversation so far today? Because we began with Soupy Sales in baseball, and here we're back into baseball with Jim Bunning.
I think baseball is like it's the core language game. It's the metaphor of American political life. 3 strikes and you're out. He hit a foul ball. There's something to it. I think the problem with the metaphor is that that in the real world, baseball is essentially is not covered by the antitrust laws. And what's happening is these companies, many of them are corporations, are buying these baseball teams, and turning them into companies, and they make more money off of the various bric-a-brac that they sell to people, and they're able to promote their product and so forth and so on. And then you have a lot of rich individuals who have a monopoly. You can't just set up a league. You can't just set up your own baseball team because they've got a monopoly, and it's guaranteed by the U.S. government. So it's in a sense it really is a very good metaphor for the American situation, in which a handful of people become stars, and the rest of it's well known in the baseball business that the majority of people who are in baseball do not make a lot of money, and there's a trade going on, especially in places in the Caribbean, where they go and they're I don't know if you've seen the commercial. They say, how many people can make it in professional sports? It's like 1 in 10,000. And you can apply the same thing to the music industry, the art industry. I think that these are reflective of the lack of cultural awareness of what it is that we need to do. They're reflected in our kind of fundamental cultural and sports organizations. And so in that sense, we're kind of shocked when we say, it's going on in baseball. I mean, how could it be going on in baseball? It's going on in baseball because this is the nature of the organizational structures that we've created.
Reflective of society.
It's reflective of society.
Now, let's segue on to health care. What's your take on the health care bill which passed through Congress?
Well, we're really disappointed in the Green Party because we're big supporters of single payer, and I was very, upset that Kucinich didn't stand up and really, take a couple of shots there. But let's say for argument that it is a good thing, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Let's work on the premise for a second that it's a step forward rather than possibly a step backwards.
I mean, some of the concerns that I've read in various journals and such is that they're talking about covering around 41 million people by 2014. I think that's overly optimistic. I think the number's going to be closer to 20 million, somewhere around that. The other problem is that it requires everybody to have insurance. So, I mean, the question that you have to ask yourself is, if you're a slacker, if you're a person that refuses to pay for this private insurance that's now required, will they have a health police that will arrest you and bring you to Hartford Hospital or put you?
What will be the consequences?
Yeah, maybe they'll send you for a week or two to Aetna Life and Casualty, and they'll put you in one of the file cabinets there.
Now, my good and dear friend Sal Liccione, who's I've known for a number of years now, who talks to Dennis Kucinich pretty regularly, and he actually was Dennis's campaign manager here in Connecticut 2 years ago.
Very good guy, by the way.
Yeah, he seemed to be of a mind a while back that Kucinich would vote against the health care bill when it originally came out, and he did. But when push came to shove, when the bill were to come up again, even if we're not the kind of bill that he was happy about, that he would vote for it in order to, well, a couple things, to provide cover for somebody else, Blue Dog Democrat or whomever, to vote against it for their own self-interest. He would provide the cover for it, and that Dennis would also vote for it because the overriding concern of getting so many people insured that have no insurance, and also people that have pre-existing conditions and things of that nature. Because Dennis grew up in poverty, of course, so he knows.
I think you're hitting the point. The pre-existing conditions is the only real thing of value in this law.
Yeah, that's
I think that's helpful. But a lot of cynics, and I'm not one of them, say that they'll find a way to cherry pick in spite of the system that has been established. That remains to be seen. I think there's a lot of administrative stuff. I mean, the teabaggers are going berserk over this. The funny thing about it, of course, is you have, and the reason is because you have Fox News essentially encouraging these people.
Yeah.
I mean, they have huge power.
Yeah.
The problem is that they're talking about Obama being a socialist or a communist.
Yeah.
This is absurd. It's absurd on its face. But this is where a political dialogue is, and I think the problem again is you have a problem with.
You mean he doesn't put the Hitler mustache on at night when he goes to bed?
Well, I don't know. I'm not privy to that. He was actually a radio guy here in Connecticut. That's where he got his start. He got his start here in Connecticut, and he, along with quite a few other people on the right, this seems to be a breeding ground for. Now, I'm a radio producer, a progressive radio producer, as well as being the co-chair of the Green Party. So sometimes I have these funny hats that I keep switching back and forth. But I think the key is that we're not having a debate. People don't know what's in this bill. They don't know. I mean, I don't see the advantage of getting angry about it. I think what people ought to be doing is finding out what the law says and improving it. And I don't want to dump on Dennis Kucinich. Dennis is a nice guy. He was on CNN. He said, I don't like this law. But I voted for it because, I thought it was to help Obama's presidency. So I respect that. But I think that the problem with progressives within the Democratic Party is that they have to start to realize that the Democratic Party is the graveyard of progressive politics. And I think that, if you look historically, look at FDR, 1933. I challenge your audience to go out to YouTube, and of course they're going to see Progressive Soup out there, but they should also look at FDR's 1933 inaugural speech, and he talks about the money changers. He talks about what needed to be done, and then of course by 1938 you have a different FDR in a different country.
Yeah.
So and of course the New Deal was reversed by the Supreme Court of that period and other forces. I mean, there was a plot to overthrow FDR. This is not baloney. You could say it's a conspiracy theory, but the facts are there.
There's a lot of evidence to support it, and it's not so far-fetched an idea.
I mean, the DuPonts were involved, the GM was involved. I mean, the major corporations were flirting with fascism in the United States. It's all there. It was, there was a federal investigation. So, the key to understanding what's going on in our history is to understand the dark places where we don't want to go and look. And one of those dark places is healthcare, because there's really no reason in the world why an ambulance ride should cost $954 to go 2 miles.
Yeah, that's preposterous.
Or why do you go to France and you have a bypass operation cost $1,300? Because a friend of mine was in France and he had to have a bypass, and they said, well, what do I do? Well, call your insurance company and pay with your credit card.
Yeah.
So he's had it done a couple times, okay? And when he had it done in France, it was $1,300 American dollars. If it was the same operation was done here in the United States, it's between $25,000 and $35,000.
$35, okay.
But the bottom, maybe more. It depends on the hospital, the doctor, and what have you.
Yeah.
So, what's going on here? We're not going to get controls. The reason I bring this up is not because I'm so smart and know about French, healthcare. I'm talking more about cost controls, because that's not what's in this law.
Right, and that's the bottom line. Is then that's what single payer would have accomplished, because it would have taken the profit motive out for HMOs. It would have taken HMOs eventually out of the picture, and that's obviously the self-interest that they are working to protect.
Right. Last time I looked in the U.S. Constitution, it said, it doesn't say that doctors or psychiatrists or whatever should be billionaires or millionaires.
No.
The bottom line is that they work very hard. They have a long education.
A lot of responsibility.
Yep. But the key to this is to understand that these conditions in our healthcare system are just as unhealthy for them as it is for their patients.
Well, we're very fortunate in Bethel because we have 3 very good old-style family doctors that I would venture to say it's pretty safe to say that went into the profession not for money, but